Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet Freebird, who has officially traded his office nest for a sun chair by the lake. He's ready to spend his days fishing for the juiciest worms and perfecting his suntan. So Freebird can be made in sport, DK, or plush yarn by adjusting your hook size. Today I'm going to be crocheting with worsted weight yarn and a 4mm crochet hook. If you haven't already, be sure to snag the matching greeting card to make an adorable and one-of-a-kind gift that your friends and family will love. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and get started on Freebird's pattern, and we're going to begin with the body and head, and we're going to be using this aqua colored yarn. And the first thing that we need to do is form a magic ring. So let's review how to get a magic ring started and how to make our first single crochet stitch. Alright, so let's review how to form a magic ring. So we're going to start by taking a little length of our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration. Make sure you're using the correct color for the pattern that you are following along with. So I'm going to take this white, and I'm going to reserve myself a little bit of a tail. So I'm going to take the end of that yarn, and I'm going to stretch it so I've got about 5 inches or so of a tail. And the tail is going to be the end that is not attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got about 5 inches or so reserved of that tail, we're going to take our yarn hand. For me, that's my left hand, but if you're a left-handed crocheter, this might be your right hand. But we're going to take our yarn hand and make a bit of a finger guns here. So my index and my middle finger, I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to be looking at the inside of them. Then I'm going to take that tail that I've reserved, that 5 inches, and I'm going to lay it so that it's over the lower digit on my index and my middle. And then I'll take my thumb and I'm going to press the yarn to those 2 fingers. Then I'm going to take my hook hand, which is for me my right hand, but could be your left hand, and I'm going to grab the working yarn. Once I've got that grabbed, I'll take it and I'm going to wrap it around the back side of my index and my middle finger so that it's sort of close to that top digit. I'll flip my hand over so you can see. So I want it to be close to my top digit, so you can see it's closer to the 2 tops of my fingers here. So we're going to wrap that around, and then once we've got it around the top digit of those 2 fingers, we're going to bring it so that it goes behind our thumb again. So I use my thumb and I pinch that second wrap in place. Then we're going to keep wrapping, this time going around the lower digit on our 2 fingers. So I'll flip my hand over so you can see these 2 wraps here. This is that one I just made, going around that lower digit. So we'll wrap around that lower digit, and then we're going to take our working yarn and one more time snug it behind our thumb, and then just pull it out of our way. So once we've done that, we should have 2 wraps and this sort of X shape on the insides of our hands. So once we have all of the yarn wrapped around our yarn hand here, we're ready to take our crochet hook in our hook hand, and we're going to flip our yarn hand over so that we're looking at the back side of our fingers. So we should have 2 wraps, one around the top digit, one around the lower digit on our yarn hand. We're going to take our hook and slip it underneath that top wrap, and then use the hook part to snag that lower wrap and bring it underneath the top wrap. Then we're going to take both of our hands and we're going to flip them over so that we're looking at the inside and away from our body. So I'm flipping out and away from my body. And then I'm going to bring my 2 hands together, so my yarn hand and my hook hand. I'm going to bring them so the index finger here on my hook hand can touch the back side of my yarn hand. Then using the thumb and index finger of my hook hand, I'm going to grab both the wrap on my hook and the wrap still on my fingers right where they meet. So I'm going to kind of snag the 2 of them together right there. Once I've got those pinched between my thumb and index finger on my hook hand, I can let go with my thumb and then gently slide those wraps off of my index and middle finger. So now that I've done that, let's locate both the tail, that's the end that's no longer attached to our ball of yarn, so it's got this blunt cut end on it. And we're going to kind of pull that over into the 12 o'clock position, so kind of up and away. And then let's locate the working yarn. That's the stuff still attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got those two identified, we're going to take the working yarn and begin tensioning it. So to do that, we'll take our index finger on our yarn hand. That for me is my left hand. Could be your right hand for you if you're a left-handed crocheter. And we're going to slip the working yarn over the top of our index finger. Then we'll take our middle, ring, and pinky finger on our yarn hand, and we're going to wrap those around that working yarn. Once you've done that, we also need to sandwich this working yarn in between our magic ring and our tail. So to do that, I like to take my middle finger and thumb on my yarn hand, and I'm going to grab that tail with my middle finger here. And then with my thumb, I want to grab the ring. So we don't want to grab our working yarn, which is kind of going in through that ring. We want to just get the bottom end of the ring here. And once you've got those two, we're going to kind of pinch them together. And you can see that sandwiches our working yarn in between the two of them. Once we've got those grabbed with our yarn hand, we can let go with our index and thumb on our hook hand. And the ring here that's on our hook is really loose. We'll tighten that by pulling our index finger up and away. You can see how that tightens that yarn. And then once we've done that, we're ready to yarn over and draw through the loop on our hook. So we'll take our hook, put the yarn over our hook, so I kind of just swing around the back side there and grab it. And we're going to pull that working yarn directly through the loop on our hook. Once we've done that, you can let go. It's not going to come undone. It won't come untied, which is very comforting because we've spent all this time creating it. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to begin is we're going to take the tail, and you can see it's threaded through our magic ring. We're going to take that tail and we're going to pull it out from the center of that ring. And from here, we're ready to begin working in the magic ring. We also need to work over the tail as well. So we'll take that ring and we'll take the tail and we're going to set them together so that we are working over both of these strands, the ring and the tail. All right, you are ready to go ahead and continue on in your pattern. All right, so now that I have my magic ring formed, I'm ready to go ahead and start in on round 1. And if you look at the top left-hand corner, you're going to see all of the instructions for the pattern are going to be in that corner, and they're going to track with us as we work. So feel free to reference the top corner in addition to the written pattern. So for round 1, our instructions are 6 SC in MR, and then there's a number in parentheses at the very end. What that's saying is that we need to put 6 single crochet stitches inside of our magic ring, and then at the end of this round we'll have 6 stitches total. So to make our first single crochet stitch, we're going to be working both inside of the magic ring and then over the tail that we use to tie the magic ring. So I like to pinch those two together in my yarn hand, and then I'll take my hook and I'm going to go from front to back underneath both the tail and that loop of the magic ring. Then I'm going to yarn under, meaning I'm going to put the yarn underneath my crochet hook, and I'm going to grab it with the hook and pull it through that magic ring and then up into a nice tall loop on my crochet hook. Then to finish off my single crochet stitch, I'm going to yarn over, meaning I'm going to put the yarn over my hook, and then I'll draw that yarn through the 2 remaining loops left on my crochet hook. And that forms our first single crochet stitch. We're also going to mark this first stitch with our stitch marker because it helps us keep track of where the end and the beginning of each round is. So I slipped my marker straight through both sides of that little V on the top of the stitch. So there's our first single crochet stitch. We need 5 more to have 6 total, and we're going to make them the same way we made that first one. So we'll take our hook, go through that ring, yarn under, and draw our working yarn up into a nice tall loop. then yarn over and draw through the 2 remaining loops on my hook. So there's our second. There's my third single crochet stitch. Here's my fourth. My fifth. And my sixth. You can double check how many stitches you've made if you lose count by counting these little V shapes that form on the side of your work. So if you rotate your work so you can see the tops of the stitches, the first one we've marked, so we can count that as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We don't count the loop on our hook as a stitch. It's sort of like a stitch in progress. So once you have all 6 of the stitches you need for round 1, we're going to do the magic part of our magic ring. We're going to take that little tail, and by holding our work by our hook, pull that tail tightly to close off that first round of single crochet stitches. And that sets us up for round 2. So if you look at the top left hand corner, for round 2 we need to put 6 INC in this round, and that will give us 12 stitches by the end of round 2. So an INC is an increase, and the way we'll make an increase is we're going to make 2 single crochet stitches in the same stitch from the previous round. So let's start by finding where we need to place our first stitch. We're going to take our stitch marker out, but keep your eyes on where it's located currently, because that's where our first stitch needs to go. So we'll take our hook, and just like we did with the stitch marker, we're going to pass it underneath both of those loops of the V. And then from here, it's just like making a single crochet stitch inside of our magic ring. We'll yarn under and draw up a nice tall loop through the stitch, and then yarn over and draw through both loops left on our hook. We also need to mark that stitch that we've just created, and we're always going to mark that first stitch of the round. Then to finish that increase, we need to put a second single crochet stitch in the same place that first one's in. So if you look, you can still see the stitch from the previous round. It's right here, and that V is still there too. It's just a little smaller since this stitch is kind of covering it up. So I like to push my hook through that hole where the stitch is located and make my second single crochet stitch in the same way. So you can see we have 2 stitches coming out of the same hole or stitch from the round previous. So to make our next single crochet stitch, we're going to kind of rotate our work and be working in this next V shape here along the side. So we'll make our second increase by going through, yarning under, and drawing up a nice tall loop, then yarning over and drawing through both. And we'll finish our increase by putting a second single crochet stitch in that same place. So there I have 2 increases done, so I have 4 stitches created total. And I'm going to keep increasing, adding 2 single crochet stitches to each of these 4 remaining stitches from round 1. And that will give me 12 stitches total at the end of round 2, because we're doubling the 6 stitches from round 1. So I'm all the way around round 2. I can double check that I have the correct amount of stitches by once again counting these little V shapes along the top, and of course excluding the loop on my hook. But I have 12 stitches total, so I'm ready to start in on round 3. But before I do, I'm going to pull my magic ringtail one final time, and then I'm going to give it a trim. I'm not going to cut it all the way off, I'm just going to trim it so that it doesn't hang down and get tangled with my working yarn. And then you can discard anything that you've trimmed. And that keeps it out of our way as we continue working around. Alright, so we're ready for round 3. And if you look at the top left, you can see we have some parentheses now in our instructions. So let me translate what that means. So inside the parentheses we have one SC, comma, one INC, and then outside it says times 6. So what that's saying is that everything in those parentheses needs to be repeated in the order it appears 6 times total to get 18 stitches at the end of round 3. So let's start with what we know. We'll make one single crochet stitch in that first stitch of the round. So pull your stitch marker out, go through that first stitch and make one single crochet. Mark that first stitch, and then in the next stitch we're going to increase, so 2 single crochet stitches inside of one stitch from the previous round, and that is one time or one repetition of those parentheses. We need to do that pattern 5 more times around. So we'll put one single crochet stitch in the next stitch of the round, and then an increase in the next stitch, and that's our second repetition. So we're going to keep repeating one single crochet increase until we've reached our last stitch, and that will give us 18 stitches total at the end of round 3. So that's the end of round 3 for me. I'm ready for round 4, where we have another set of parentheses to repeat. But this time, instead of putting just one single crochet before our increase, we're going to put 1 in the first and then 1 in the second. So we'll take our stitch marker out, place 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, one single crochet stitch in the second stitch of the round. So there's that 1, 2 single crochet, and then an increase in the third stitch of the round. And just like round 3 when we repeated that pattern 6 times, we're going to repeat this new pattern 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions, which will give us 24 stitches at the end of this round. So that's 1 single crochet stitch, 2 single crochet stitch, so 1, 2, and then an increase. And that's my second repetition. I'll keep repeating that until I get to the very end of my round. Alright, so that wraps up round 4 for me. Rounds 5 and 6, all we'll need to do is put one single crochet stitch in every stitch of the round. So 24 single crochet stitch around for 2 rounds, for both round 5 and round 6. So don't forget to move your stitch marker up for each round. So here I am putting my stitch marker back in for round 5. And I will see you back here whenever I have made my last single crochet stitch for round 6. Alright, so I just finished round 6, and you can see my piece is starting to kind of cup a little bit. And I wanted to double check that yours was forming the same way that mine is. So there's a chance, as you've been working around, your piece has started to kind of cup the other direction. So a good tell that it's cupping this way is that your magic ring tail is kind of sticking outside on your piece, and then your stitches have these little lines that run through them. So this is the inside of our piece, and we want to make sure that that is on the inside of this sort of bowl or cup shape. So if your piece has been working inside out, this is a good time to kind of encourage it to cup the right direction, so that your stitches that have these nice tidy little X shapes are on the outside of the dome that our piece is making. Alright, so that is round 6 done for me. Round 7, we're going to go ahead and have a new parentheses pattern to repeat. So we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches. So round 3 we did 1, round 4 we did 2, and now we're doing 3 single crochet. And then an increase. And then just like all those parentheses patterns before, we're going to repeat that 6 times total. So another 5 repetitions of that 1, 2, 3 increase pattern. That wraps up round 7 for me. So for rounds 8 through 10, just like rounds 5 and 6, we're going to just put one single crochet stitch in each stitch of the round, always moving our stitch marker up a stitch as we work. So I will see you back here whenever I have finished round 10 of just one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around. Alright, so I just finished round 10, and before I move on to round 11, we have a color change that we need to do. So to start our color change, we're going to take our crochet hook and the loop that's on it, and pull that loop up nice and tall, and then remove our hook. Then we need to cut the blue yarn that we've been working with, and I don't need very much here, maybe 4 inches or so from our piece. And then we're going to switch colors to this sort of red, hot pink kind of color. And to switch colors, we'll take our hook and we're going to pass it through the top of the stitch and then through the bottom of the stitch that we've just formed. So we'll push our hook through both of those parts. Let me do that again so you can really see where I'm going here. So that V shape that we have at the top, I'm going to go through that front. So I'm pushing through both sides of that. And then I'm going to grab the front part of the stitch here. And then once I've done that, I'm going to take my new color and I'll make a little tiny loop out of it. So I've got a little tail and a little loop. I'm going to push that through on my hook and then pull that new color through those two loops on my hook. So I've got two loops, one red one on my hook itself and one blue one hanging out in the back. So I'll take the tail from the blue that I cut and I'm going to pull it. And then I'm going to hold the pink tails. And then I'm going to hold the pink yarn's tail and the blue yarn's tail together. So that sets us up for round 11, where we're going to just continue putting one single crochet stitch in each stitch all the way around. So let's go ahead and take our stitch marker out. And for the first couple of stitches, we need to work these tails in just like we did with the tail on our magic ring. So we're going to go through our next single crochet stitch. And then we're going to take those tails and lay them over the top of our hook. And then from here, it's just like a regular single crochet. We'll yarn under, draw through the stitch itself, then yarn over, and draw through both left on our hook. And then even though it's pretty obvious this is the first stitch of our round because it's the first red stitch we have, let's go ahead and mark it as well. And then I like to tighten this stitch by pulling the red and the blue tail. So let's work the next couple of stitches, working these two tails in with us as we go. So go through our next stitch, lay our tails over the top of our hook, then yarn under and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through both. And we'll work the tails in one more time on the next stitch. Lay them over the top. Alright, so now that we've worked those tails in for 3 stitches, we can take them and just toss them inside of the body here. So they're worked in, they're not going to come undone, and they'll stay out of our way. Alright, so we can continue adding single crochet stitches in our new color, one in each stitch all the way around. Alright, that's round 11 done for me. So for round 12, we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next 4 stitches of the round. It's this new parentheses pattern. So there are my first 4 single crochet, then an increase in the next stitch. Then we're going to repeat that parentheses pattern 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions, all the way around until the end of round 12. Alright, that's the end of round 12 for me. So for rounds 13 through 16, just like with rounds 8 and 10 and 5 through 6, we're going to just put one single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around, remembering to move our stitch marker up for each round that we do. So I will see you back here whenever I have finished round 16 and we're ready to start round 17. Alright, so I have just finished round 16 and I'm ready for round 17, where we've got a new kind of stitch that we need to learn. But let's start with what we know, which is to put one single crochet stitch in the next 4 stitches of our round. And then we need to make a DEC, or a decrease. So the way we're going to decrease is we're going to go into our next stitch and yarn under and draw up a loop. And then we're going to repeat that process in the next stitch. So we're going to go through, yarn under, and draw up a loop. So you should have 3 loops on your hook at this point. And then to finish our decrease, we're going to yarn over and draw through all 3 loops on our hook. And that takes 2 stitches from the previous round and puts them into 1 stitch for this round, decreasing the amount of stitches that we have. Alright, so we're going to repeat that pattern of 4 single crochet stitches, and then decreasing another 4 times now for me, for a total of 6 repetitions of that pattern. Alright, that wraps up round 17 for me. Round 18, we're going to start by putting 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches of the round. And then a decrease. And then just like last round, we're going to repeat this sequence 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around. Alright, so that wraps up round 18 for me. So for round 19, we'll start by putting 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches of the round. And then follow that with a decrease. Then just like the last 2 rounds, repeat that pattern another 5 times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around. Okay, that wraps up round 19 for me. So for round 20, we're going to put one single crochet stitch in the next stitch of the round. Then follow that with a decrease. Then repeat that pattern another 5 times for a total of 6 repetitions all the way around. Alright, so that wraps up round 20 for me. Before I make the last round, which is round 21, I'm going to stuff the inside of Freebird's body. So I'm going to take my hook and the loop on it, I'm going to pull it up long, and then take my hook out so that I can stuff without worrying about that last stitch coming undone. So let's grab some stuffing and add it to the inside of the body. Alright, so I have Freebird stuffed. I'm ready to go ahead and reinsert my hook into that loop. And then take my working yarn and pull that loop down. And then we're going to make our last round, which is round 21. And we're just going to decrease every stitch all the way around. Alright, so I've just finished my last decrease, so we're ready to fasten off. So to do that, we're going to take our stitch marker out and then make a slip stitch in that stitch the marker was just in. So to make a slip stitch, we'll take our hook, go through that stitch, yarn under and draw up a loop, and then draw the loop we just created through the only other loop on our hook. Alright, now that we've made our slip stitch, we can go ahead and cut our working yarn. We need maybe 4 to 6 inches to sew with, so go ahead and cut yourself a little bit of a tail. And then pull that slip stitch loop on your hook until that tail we cut goes through. And then tighten that slip stitch down by pulling that tail. And then we're going to use this tail to sew closed that last round of decreases that we made. So go ahead and thread the eye of a yarn or tapestry needle with the tail we just cut. And then we're going to sew through each of the front loops left behind on all of the decreases from round 21. So we've been working through both the front and back loop. I've got both loops here on my yarn needle. The back loop is the one that's closest to the inside of our work. So this one here, and then this one, of course, is then the front loop. So to grab just the front loops, we're going to grab kind of in between those two, that V shape of each stitch. We're going to go up through the space between those two legs of the V and bring our needle up through, and then rotate and sew through the next stitch in that same way. And continue rotating and sewing through each front loop left behind from our last round. Then when you've sewn through all front loops, you can pull that tail to pull that last round closed. Then to keep that last round closed, we need to tie a knot. So to do that, we're going to loop our yarn over the surface of our work, and then take our yarn needle and sew into a little of the fabric of the body and then up through that loop itself. And then we're going to pull that tail, and that loop's going to wrap around the tail and tie a knot. Then we want to weave this tail in by sewing down underneath that knot. I like to go through the center of that round we just closed up, and then up through a place in the body. Then we're going to pull that yarn through, which pulls the knot to the inside and weaves this tail in. Then you can unthread your tapestry or yarn needle, and by pulling that tail tightly and snipping close to the surface of our work, we'll weave that tail in. Then we can discard any extra that we didn't need. And that wraps up the body. So let's move on to the next part of our pattern. Alright, so next up in our pattern is the beak. So we're going to be using this midnight blue yarn, and we're going to begin by forming another magic ring. Alright, so now that I have my magic ring formed, I'm ready for round 1, where we're going to put 4 single crochet stitches inside of that magic ring. Alright, when you have all 4 single crochet stitches made in your magic ring, you can pull the tail to close off round 1. Then we're ready for round 2. We're going to begin by putting an increase in the first stitch of the round. So there's my increase. Then we'll put 1 single crochet stitch in the remaining 3 stitches of the round. And that wraps up round 2. And then round 3, the last round of the beak, we'll put 1 increase in the first stitch of the round. And then 1 single crochet stitch in the remaining 4 stitches of the round. Alright, that wraps up the beak, so let's go ahead and fasten off. So we're going to take our stitch marker out, and then just like with the body, we'll slip stitch in that stitch the marker was just in. So go through that stitch, draw up a loop, and then draw that loop through the only other loop on your hook. Then we need to cut a tail to sew with, so 6 to 8 inches. I always like to have a little extra just in case. And we're going to pull that slip stitch loop until the tail we've cut goes through, and then tighten that slip stitch down. I'm also going to take the magic ring tail and stuff it inside of the beak. That acts as free stuffing, and keeps it out of my way while I'm sewing. Alright, so now that I have the beak done, I'm ready to go ahead and attach. So we're going to attach it to Freebird's body, and I wanted to point out something before we start. When we made our color change, there's a little bit of a jog. So if you kind of rotate Freebird around, it's pretty obvious when you see it. This is the back of the body. So when we attach the beak, make sure we're attaching it so that that is the back of Freebird's body. Then the beak's going to attach just above where that color change is, so that the bottom of the beak is sort of sitting on top of where the red yarn is. So let's go ahead and thread the tail that we trimmed for the beak through the eye of our tapestry needle. And I'm going to be using a metal sharper needle this time, so it's not so hard to get through the fabric of the body. And we're going to then we'll go ahead and set Freebird's beak onto the body. And to attach, we're going to take the needle and go through some of the stitches of the body, and then up through one of the stitches from the last round. Then we'll rotate and repeat, grab some of the stitches of the body, sew up through the next stitch on the beak, and pull those stitches pretty tight. And we're going to repeat that, sewing through all 6 stitches from the last round of the beak until the beak is attached. Alright, so I have sewn all the way around and I'm ready to tie a knot and weave this tail in. So we'll tie a knot the same way we did on the body. We're going to loop that dark blue tail over a place on the beak itself, and then sew through some of the fabric of the beak, and then up through that loop we've just formed, and then pull until that blue wraps all the way around our working yarn, and then sew down into the beak and then into the body. And then pull that tail to pull the knot to the inside. Then you can unthread your tapestry or yarn needle. And just like with the tail we've done before, we'll hold it tight, trim close to the body, and discard anything we didn't end up needing. Alright, so now that we have the beak attached, let's go ahead and embroider on the eyes next. So we'll go ahead and take some black embroidery floss, and we're going to thread this through the eye of our embroidery needle. And then we're going to sew the eyes on in the rounds just to either side of the beak. So I'm going to take my embroidery floss and I'm going to go in between the spaces of some stitches to the right of the beak. And then I'm going to come up so that I am in the round just above where the beak attaches. I'm going to pull, but I'm going to leave a tail of the embroidery floss on the outside of my work. So then I'm going to sew a long straight stitch, maybe 3 stitches in length, away from the beak, and send my needle into the center of the stitch just below, and then centered, so in that second stitch, underneath that long straight stitch I've sewn. Then I'll take my embroidery needle and slip it underneath that long stitch I've sewn. And then by folding my embroidery floss down and pulling, I'll form that eye shape. And I'm going to sew down through that same stitch I came up through for this stitch here. Then I'll sew across to sew the other eye. And when I pull this, it'll hold that eye shape So I'll repeat on the other side. I'll sew this next stitch 3 stitches along. And then I'm going to sew across and come up through the same space between stitches that I started. That's going to cinch that eye down. Then I can unthread my embroidery needle. And then I'm going to take these 2 tails and I'm going to tie a double square knot. It's just like you would tie your shoe. Now that I've done that, I'm going to trim them really short. And then to weave them in, I'm going to take my hook and push it through the stitch right next to those, and then pull the work up and go where those tails are, and use my hook to kind of push them inside of the body, which hides them and secures both of the eyes. Next, let's go ahead and add the feather detail here along the inside red part of Freebird's body. So we're going to take some white yarn, and I'm going to cut quite a lot of it, maybe 24 inches or so, because I don't like to run out. And I'm going to go ahead and thread it through the eye of my tapestry needle here. And I'm going to start over on the right hand side of Freebird. And the feathers are going to be kind of here on the front and only run along the front part of the body. So I'm going to sew into the side here and come up maybe 2 stitches away, and then pull but leave a tail just like I did with the eyes on the outside of the body. Then these details are going to stretch down just over 1 row, so I'll sew directly underneath in the next row down. And I'm going to sew them every 2 stitches. So here's the first sort of feather detail. Then I'll sew up into the next row, and I'm sort of just going to zigzag around sewing these feather details on. Alright, so here's the first row done. Then I'm going to sew down, skipping 1 row. So I'll sew down into the next row. So you can see I've skipped over this row right here. And I'll start sewing feathers onto this row here, lining them up so that they're in line with the first row of feathers that I've sewn. Alright, so there's the second row of feathers done. I've got 1 more row to go. So just like before, I'm going to skip over 1 round and then make my last round of feathers, even with the first 2 rounds that I've sewn. Alright, so here's the last feather that I'm going to sew, and I'm going to send my needle up through the same space that we sent our needle down through when we started sewing. So there are the feathers added. Then I can go ahead and unthread my tapestry needle, and just like with the eyes, I'm going to do a double square knot, tying these 2 white tails together. Then I'll cut them short, discard anything I didn't use, and then just like before, I'll take my crochet hook, go into the stitch right next door, so like push through and into the fabric, pull that fabric up, and then use my hook to push those white tails inside of the fabric of the body. Alright, so there are the feathers added. So let's move on to the next part of our pattern. Alright, so next up in our pattern is the tail. And we're going to be using the same color we used on the bottom half of Freebird's body, the sort of red-pink color. And we need to start by forming a slip knot and chaining. So let's review how to get a slip knot formed and how to chain. Alright, so let's review how to tie a slip knot and how to form a chain stitch. So we're going to take our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration, so just double check you're using the correct color from your pattern. And we're going to reserve ourselves a little bit of a tail, just like we do with our magic ring. So I'm going to take maybe 5 or 6 inches or so of my working yarn here, make myself a little tail. And then we're going to take that tail and we're going to wrap it behind our working yarn. So we're sort of making like a lowercase letter B. So once we've got that wrapped around, we formed this loop here. We're going to kind of sandwich the working yarn with the tail. So bring it back around and kind of cross it over that loop. Sort of like a pretzel twist. Then when we've done that, what we need to do is draw this twist that we've just done, that strand, through this loop without pulling the tail all the way through, because that would just tie a knot. So I take my hook hand, which is my right hand, and I grab what I've laid over that loop and pull it. And then with my other hand, I grab my working yarn and then pull the loop through. And the reason I form my slip knots this way is because they tighten when you pull on the tail, but not when you pull on the working yarn. It won't tighten while you're trying to add stitches to it. So once you've got that slip knot formed, you're going to take your hook and slip it inside of the slip knot, and then pull the tail to tighten it into a loop down onto your hook. Then you're ready to begin tensioning by laying the working yarn over your yarn index finger. So for me, that's my left index finger. And then wrapping the rest of your fingers around our working yarn. And then I like to hold on to the slip knot itself with my middle and thumb on my yarn hand. And then we're ready to form a chain. So to chain, we'll take our hook and we're going to yarn over, meaning we're going to put the yarn over our hook, and then draw the working yarn through the slip knot we tied, and then pull up to form a nice tall loop. So that's our first chain. To continue chaining, we're going to just keep yarning over and drawing a nice tall loop through each time. One final thing though, the loop on your hook, as I'm sure I may have mentioned in the video before, that doesn't count as a stitch. This is sort of like a stitch in progress. So right now I have 2 chain stitches formed. I'll yarn over and draw another stitch through. That'll be 3, 4. And as you add chain stitches, I tend to move my middle and my thumb up closer to my hook to help me sort of tension my yarn a little easier. So as I chain, I just keep shifting my hand down the stitches that I've just created. Alright, so that's how you tie a slip knot and chain. Alright, so now that we have our slip knot formed, we're ready to go ahead and begin chaining, and we need to chain 7 stitches. Alright, so I have my 7 stitches chained, and in the second chain from our hook, we're going to place our first single crochet stitch. So just like when we're crocheting in the round, that first loop on our hook doesn't count as a stitch. So we're going to count 1, 2 chains, and make our single crochet stitch in that chain. So when we find that second chain, so I like to count this loop here, 1, 2, we're going to push through that loop Then yarn under and draw up a loop just like we would with a regular single crochet, and then finish. Then we're going to make another single crochet stitch in our next chain, which is this next V shape. Go through, yarn under and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through both. Then in the next 2 stitches we need to make a half double crochet stitch. So to do that, we're going to start by wrapping our yarn around our hook. So we're going to take our hook and we're going to pass it underneath our yarn. Sort of wraps the yarn around the hook. Then we'll go through our next chain stitch and yarn under and draw through that chain stitch and up a nice tall loop. Then to finish our half double crochet, we'll yarn over and draw through all 3 loops on our hook. So we need to make another half double crochet stitch in the next stitch. So we're again wrap our yarn around our hook. And go through our next chain stitch. Then yarn under and draw up a loop. Then yarn over and draw through all 3. So there are our half double crochet. Then in our next stitch we're going to make a double crochet increase. So we're going to start by wrapping our yarn around our hook, then going through that next chain stitch, yarning under and drawing up a loop. Then we're going to yarn over and draw through 2 loops on our hook. Then yarn over and draw through the last 2 loops on our hook. So that's 1 double crochet. We need to make 1 more in that same space. So we'll wrap the yarn around our hook, go through that same spot, yarn over and draw up a loop, then yarn over and draw through 2, then yarn over and draw through the last 2. Then in the next stitch we're going to make another double crochet increase. So wrap the yarn around our hook, go through the next chain, which is the last chain of our tail, yarn over and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2, yarn over and draw through 2. Make our second double crochet stitch in that same place. Then we're going to be working down the other side of the chain here. So in that chain stitch where our first double crochet increases, we're going to put another double crochet increase. So I'm going to kind of flip around the other side of the chain here, go through, yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through 2, yarn over and draw through 2, make my second double crochet, then we'll make 1 half double crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. So there's my first. And my second. Then we'll make 1 single crochet stitch. And then in that last stitch here, we're going to slip stitch. Which wraps up the tail. So we can cut a tail. And then pull that last slip stitch through and tighten. Then we'll weave in the tail from our slip knot by threading it through the eye of our needle and sewing it through some of the back sides of the stitches here. Once you've done that, you can trim close to the fabric of the tail. Then we're going to take the slip stitch tail and weave it in so it's right at the tip of the tail, which is where it attaches to the body. So go ahead and thread that through the eye of your tapestry needle. Then we're going to sew it up to the very tip of the tail. And then the tail attaches to the back of Freebird's body, right where he is seated on the ground. So I'm going to line up where I want the tail to go. That looks pretty good to me. And then just sew it to the body with a couple of stitches that go through both the tail and through the fabric of the body. Then to fasten off, I'm going to make sure that my yarn is coming up through the body and not through the tail. And then tie a surface knot by looping the yarn over the surface of the work, sewing into a little of the fabric of the work and up through that loop. And then weaving that tail into the body and trimming. And that's the tail done and attached. So let's move on in our pattern. Alright, so next up we're going to make the hair or the feathers here on the top of Freebird's head. So we're going to take our hook and we're going to insert it into some of the stitches, pretty much centered here with his nose. And it's going to be 2 rounds down from that magic ring. So just like I do whenever I weave in the tails from both the eyes and the feathers, I'm going to push my hook into the fabric of the work and then up through the stitch right next door to where I pushed my hook in. Then I need to attach on the same color we used, this sort of aqua color. So just like I did with my color change, I'll make a little loop of this color with a little tail, thread that loop onto my hook, and then pull that loop through the fabric of the head. That's going to leave a little tail on the outside of the work and let me tension my working yarn. So once I've done that, I can chain 4 stitches. Then in the second chain for my hook, I'm going to slip stitch and then continue slip stitching in the next 2 chains. And then I'm going to slip stitch in that same stitch that I attached onto, so just go through that same stitch again. I'm going to repeat that a second time, so chain 4, and in the second chain for my hook, I'll slip stitch and continue slip stitching. And then slip stitch into that same stitch one last time. And then we can fasten off by cutting the working yarn. You don't need too much, 4 inches or so. Then pull that last slip stitch loop until the tail goes through and tighten down. And then we're going to take these 2 tails, the one from fastening on and the one that we just cut, and we're going to tie them together. And I'm going to double knot, just like I did with the eyes and the feathers. And now that I've done that, I can cut these 2 tails short. And just like I did with the tails from the eyes and the feathers, I'm going to go through a stitch nearby, come back up through that loop closest to the tails, and then just push them to the inside of my work with my hook. And wraps up the feathers on the top of the head. Alright, so next up are the legs, and we need to make 2, so I'll walk you through how to make the first, and then you need to make 1 more and we'll get them attached. So we're going to begin by tying another magic ring. And then for round 1, we're going to put 5 single crochet stitches inside of that magic ring. Once you have all 5 single crochet stitches added, you can pull the tail. Then for rounds 2 through 4, we're just going to put 1 single crochet stitch in each stitch all the way around. So I'll see you back here whenever I have wrapped up round 4 and show you how to fasten off. Alright, I just wrapped up round 4 and I'm ready to fasten off. So I'm going to take my stitch marker out and slip stitch to the stitch it was just in. And then cut a medium tail to sew with, 6 inches or so. Then pull that last slip stitch all the way through and tighten it down. And then I'm going to trim the magic ring tail so it's flush with the top of the foot and discard what I didn't use. And that's 1 foot complete, so let's make 1 more and then get them attached to the body. Alright, so I have both of my feet done and we're ready to attach them to the body. So I'm going to start with just 1 and threading the tail through the eye of my tapestry needle. And then they're going to attach to the bottom of the body and we're going to be sewing them flat. So you can go ahead and just pinch those 2 sides together. And then they're going to attach on the back side of the body, or the underside of the body, so that whenever Freebird is sitting, you can see just the tips of the feet. So once they're positioned, I'm going to go ahead and sew into some of the fabric of the body, and then up through both layers of the feet. And I'll repeat that until I've sewn probably 3, maybe 4 stitches across. So once I've done that, I'm going to make sure that the tail is coming up out of the body. And I'll weave my tail in the same way I've done everything so far, by tying a knot. and sewing down into the fabric of the body. And that's one of the feet attached. Let's go ahead and repeat with the other foot. Alright, and there are the feet attached. Alright, so next up we need to make the wings, and we're going to begin with this white yarn. And we'll start by forming a magic ring. Alright, now that I have my magic ring formed, I'm ready for round 1, where we're going to put 5 single crochet stitches inside of our magic ring. Alright, so there's my 5 single crochet stitches. I'll pull the tail of my magic ring, and we're going to slip stitch to the first stitch that we made of this round. Let's take our marker out and then slip stitch. And then we'll chain 1 stitch and mark that chain 1. And that sets us up for round 2, where we're going to be increasing in each stitch all the way around. So we'll go through our first stitch of the round, increase, and then keep increasing. Then we need to slip stitch in the chain 1 that we marked from the last round. So we'll take our stitch marker out and slip stitch. Then we need to do a color change here. So just like we did on Freebird's body, we're going to pull that last loop up long, but we're not going to cut the white because we're coming back for it. So we're going to go ahead and switch to that midnight blue color. And to change colors on the slip stitch, we only need to go through this loop here. So we'll slip our hook through that loop, make a little loop out of the midnight blue, and put it on our hook, and then pull it through. So we'll have 2 loops, one on our hook and one of our work. Then we'll take that white and pull, so that loop comes undone. Then we're going to hold both the white that's left over and the blue, and then slip stitch into the next stitch using our blue. Then we're going to chain 1 and mark that chain 1. So we're going to leave the white attached because we're going to come back for it. We're going to do some stripes here in these colors. So we're ready for round 3, and we're going to be working in the back loops only in our new color. So when we've sewed through the bottom of Freebird's body, we sewed through the front loops, which is this loop right here. We're going to be working in the back loops, which is just this loop of our stitch. So we'll take our hook, go through that back loop only, yarn under and draw up a loop, and yarn over and draw through both. And we're going to continue adding single crochet stitches into these back loops until we have 10 total. Alright, so there's my last single crochet stitch. I'm going to slip stitch to the chain 1 that I made and marked. And then I need to change to white again. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that last loop up long, insert my hook into that loop, and then grab the white that's still attached to the back of my work, and then pull through that loop. Then I can pull the blue out, and then slip stitch to that chain 1, and then chain 1 stitch and mark it in the new color, that white, and we're leaving the blue attached because we're going to be changing back to it. Alright, so we're in white and we're going to be working still in those back loops only. So we're going to make some single crochet stitches just in the back loops, 10 total, until we're all the way around. Alright, so there is my 10th single crochet stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and take my marker out and slip stitch in it. And then we're actually going to be done with the white here, so another color change. I'll pull that white loop up long, but this time I'm going to cut the white yarn. And then I'll go through just that loop there of the white. And then grab my blue and draw it through. And then pull the tail of the white that I just cut. Then we'll slip stitch with the blue. Then chain 1. And mark that chain 1. And still in the back loops only, we'll add 1 single crochet stitch to each back loop. Alright, there's all 10 of my single crochet stitches in the back loops. Before I slip stitch and chain 1, I'm going to take all of those tails from the color changes we did and stuff them to the inside of the wing. And keep some out of my way. Alright, I'm ready to slip stitch. And then chain 1 and mark that chain 1. And then round 6 is the last round of the wing, and we're just going to be decreasing in each stitch all the way around. Alright, there are all 5 of my decreases. I'm ready to slip stitch to that chain 1. And then we're going to cut a tail to sew with, 6 inches or so. And pull that last slip stitch through. And tighten down. And that is one of the wings done. Let's make one more and then get them attached to the body. Alright, so I have both of Freebird's wings complete, and I'm ready to go ahead and attach them to the body. So first, they're going to attach flat, and then the sort of seam that we have here where we were chaining one and slip stitching, that's going to be attached sort of on the inside, so like facing towards the body. So we're going to pinch the wing flat and make sure that our tail is over on either the right or the left-hand side of that flat seam. Then we'll go ahead and thread the tail we cut through the eye of a tapestry needle. And then the wings are going to attach right where the red and the blue meet on the body. And again, double check that that seam where our color changes are is facing the body itself. And then we're going to whip stitch through both layers of the wing and some of the fabric of the body. So I'm going to grab some fabric from the body and then sew up through both layers of the wing. And then repeat by grabbing some more fabric from the body and sewing up through both layers of the wing. And I'll continue whip stitching until I've sewn all the way across on the wing. Once the wing's attached, we can go ahead and tie a surface knot. So again, loop our work over some of the fabric of the wing, and then sew up through the wing and through the loop. Just going to tie a knot, and then I'm going to sew down into the wing and then into the body itself, and then just out through some spot. Then I can unthread the tapestry needle and pull that tail tight and trim, which attaches one of the wings to the side of the body. So let's repeat with the other wing on this side. Alright, I have both wings attached, and that wraps up Freebird's pattern.